Hey, everybody, this is Dan,
And this is Ron.
and you're listening to the Anomaly Questionable Movies podcast. And this week, we're covering a movie which was more questionable than I remembered it being. This is a movie I've seen a few times, personal favorite. And of course, I am talking about, as you may have seen in the video description, Seven Chances by Buster Keaton. Probably not actually credited to him as the director, but the whole like crediting system in the 20s was not quite as rigidly formalized as it is now. So you can pretty much safely presume that anything a director would have been doing, Keaton was probably doing on this movie. Yeah, and so Ron put a challenge to me earlier.
Okay. Yes. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no,
Dan,
I mean, it's your challenge,
Dan, here's your challenge. Can you summarize this movie in 5 sentences or less?
and then you updated it.
Dan, can you summarize this movie in 3 sentences or less?
And I asked, can the last sentence be hijinks ensue?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, then I can totally do this. So
All right.
Buster Keaton finds out that if he gets married by 7 p.m. today, he's going to inherit $7 million. But if he does not get married by 7 p.m. today, he will not inherit $7 million. He goes out haplessly looking for a woman to marry him within a 7-hour time window, but then his friend, the butler, lawyer, whatever, puts an ad in the newspaper, and there is a mob of angry women in wedding dresses chasing after him. Hijinks ensue.
That's 3. Those were
I pulled some Henry James bullshit there, but a lot of commas, but I did it.
okay. I was thinking Victor Hugo or William Faulkner sentences, but all right.
Yeah, Victor Hugo was really good at the Henry James bullshit. I think he did it before Henry James even did.
Yeah.
But no, like, you ever read any of those later Henry James books where there's like a sentence that's like a page long and it's just like endless commas, and it's not like a list. It's just like every single comma is like another qualifier on the main sentence.
Oh, wow.
It's like once you get the hang of it, it's actually really interesting, but it's very difficult to read.
Yeah, I can imagine. At least
Um,
with Victor Hugo, I think it's semicolons instead of commas. So it's really a bunch of sentences.
Yeah, with Henry James, he's just sort of, and he's doing that weird thing with like the third person omniscient. So like he's basically saying first person stuff, but he's like jumping between different interior monologues and states. So you're sort of walking through, there's like barely any dialogue usually, except for the one that's all dialogue, the awkward age. And you're just sort of walking through all these people's heads like this hall of mirrors or something.
Uh-huh.
It's like a really weird effect. What does that have to do with Buster Keaton? Nothing.
No, that's neither here nor there.
But yeah, Henry James, later Henry James, can't say enough good stuff. That was like borderline psychedelic when I was in my early 20s.
I saw The Heiress.
How was it?
It was fine, I guess. I don't remember. I saw it in class after we read what's it called? Washington. It's Washington Square, right?
Yeah, Washington Square. That's one of his earlier ones.
Yeah, I read
before
that.
He goes like super experimental.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't read any of the experimental stuff. I just read that, and that was
because like usually what they assign is like Daisy Miller, Turn of the Screw, the early stuff, because there's like you can break his career down into 3 pretty distinct periods. There's the early stuff that's like much easier to read. He tries to become a playwright, and Oscar Wilde runs circles around him, and he's apparently just this like cranky mystery science theater 3,000 guest every time he goes to the theater. There's I used to have a copy of this. There's one of his, I mean, you can get a collected set of his plays, but you don't want to get that. You want to get the ones, because the plays are terrible. He was not a playwright, but there's one edition of one of them where there's like 100-page introduction by James Thurber just saying how awful a theater goer Henry James was. and it's hilarious, and I can't recommend that highly enough. But yeah, so he gives up on the theater around like 1897, I want to say. He just starts writing these increasingly bizarrely structured books. The most famous ones are Wings of the Dove and The Golden Bowl. My personal favorite is probably The Sacred Fount, which is one of the strangest books I've ever read. But yeah, so that's your high culture for today. Now, Buster
Buster Keaton doesn't count as high culture?
Buster Keaton, Buster Keaton might be high culture by now.
As many people watch Buster Keaton as go to the opera.
So Buster Keaton in the 1920s, Buster Keaton was not considered high culture. For sure. Movies were not considered high culture. You don't really have movies were seen as frivolous entertainment in the US, I think far more than in a lot of other places like in Russia, in the USSR, they were taking film extremely seriously from a very early time. Probably because the development of film coincides with their need to establish the USSR as a state. But yeah, this would have been considered like, very popular. He was making a lot of money. There wasn't like the kind of hoi polloi were still way more interested in things like the ballet or modernist, like everybody was crazy about the Schoenberg 12-tone system around then. Well, not everybody, but the people that would have cared about that kind of stuff. And yeah, so we have Buster Keaton in Seven Chances. And so you said you've seen this movie before.
I've seen this movie, and I've seen a couple of scenes from it back when I watched an early American Masters episode about Buster Keaton. I used to have that on videotape.
Okay, yeah. And
but yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. Like, and do you remember any like impressions of it?
I thought it was funny.
Okay. Okay.
No, not much else. Other than I wanted to be Buster Keaton.
Right, like he's got like he moves very gracefully. That's like a thing that is.
He falls very gracefully.
He falls very gracefully, kind of like Dick Van Dyke. I mean, he's a few steps above Dick Van Dyke, but that's always like one of the things I always really appreciated about the Dick Van Dyke show is that Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore, they're moving around the set like kind of like dancers or something, kind of like in those Fellini movies where he would have the like record player in the background and he would instruct the actors to walk along to the record.
We even see Mary Tyler Moore dancing.
Yeah, and that was when puberty really happened for me. If you've never seen that clip of Mary Tyler Moore dancing on the Dick Van Dyke show, oh my god. Anyway, so so he's very graceful at moving, and I had kind of an interesting introduction to Buster Keaton. And I was in high school. The local public library had a very well-stocked film section, and Kino International had just released a box set of literally all of the Buster Keaton silents, except for I think there's only one that was missing off of there, and that one wasn't at the library, but I saw that later. The Cameraman, which is his last great film before they, talkies came and they started pairing him with Jimmy Durante all the time. And yeah, this is probably my favorite. This or Sherlock Jr. is my favorite Buster Keaton movie. But yeah, my younger sister and I forget what the first one we watched. I think it might have been this one. This might have been the first one that I threw on. It was that or Sherlock Jr. And we became mildly obsessed. And we watched the entire box set in like a month or two.
Oh, nice.
And so I think I've seen almost every Buster Keaton movie. There's like some of the, like I never saw Beach Blanket Bingo or some of the like later ones where he shows up for a minute or two. But I've or no, I never saw Go West. That's the only one I never saw. But the rest of them, even the early silent ones, or I mean the early talkie ones, excuse me. And yeah, so Keaton, I think, stands out amongst even like Chaplin, Lloyd. I mean, he's like leagues ahead of Harold Lloyd, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly why, because like Chaplin is more explicitly political. Chaplin has a much clearer and more coherent message. With Keaton, it's just sort of like this nonstop fatalism, which kind of like fascinated me,
Mm.
right? Because like every Buster Keaton movie almost follows the uh same basic plot line, like the general seven there's some kind of challenge is presented to this guy who's kind of like a schmuck, doesn't really have many social skills, but he's relatively well intentioned. And then whether or not he gets the woman or not at the end depends on him somehow proving himself to society by risking his life repeatedly. In the case of the general, right, like the girl's flirting with him at the beginning, and then he literally signs up to be in the Confederate Army just to impress a girl. And even when he gets close to the thing that he presumably wants, as in Seven Chances, there's Mary, the girl that he actually likes, and then there's all these women that just want to marry him to get at the $7 million. And when he's faced with the opportunity of marrying Mary without having proven himself to society by inheriting the $7 million, he rejects it because ultimately she's, as women tend to be in movies very frequently, she's a stand-in for social expectations and the eventual assimilation of the self into society. Right? That's what like Knocked Up is about.
Mhm.
Or that, I mean, there's plenty of other movies that kind of fit that description. And I think Keaton was doing that first, if I'm not. There's a bit of that in like Harold Lloyd movies. There's not really a lot of that in Chaplin. And Chaplin probably has the healthier outlook overall, just because like his outcast characters, they're eventually appreciated for their better qualities, but remain an outcast, as opposed to this sort of self-actualization through entertaining society thing. On the other hand, with Keaton, it's sort of interesting because so much of it feels very personal and autobiographical almost, even though it's these broad sight gags and bizarre visual metaphors. I guess that's the kind of point you have to expand on, isn't it?
Wait, Dan,
Uh-huh.
um, did you think the movie was funny?
Oh yeah. This movie, I always laugh really hard at this movie. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that I guess I just took that as a given.
You
And
just
I guess we should
described.
get the elephant out of the room first. There's like two gags in this that are like unbelievably racist.
Um,
Like even by the standards of well, maybe they're like they're not D.W. Griffith level, but they're pretty bad. So the first one is Buster Keaton is wandering around. He's asking any woman he can find to marry him. Sees this cute woman on a park bench, starts talking to her. She doesn't understand or doesn't seem to understand what he's saying. She picks up a newspaper. The newspaper is entirely in Hebrew. He gets scared off and runs off. And then the very next shot is he taps this other woman on the shoulder. It turns out that she's black. And he's like, nope. And yeah, so that's your reminder. This was made in the middle of the 1920s.
the woman in the first gag, the newspaper's in Yiddish. It's forward.
Oh, okay. But it's like the letters are Hebrew.
Yeah, it's Hebrew letters. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so you could actually, yeah, you could read, yeah, you actually like lived over in Israel for a while. I barely made it through my bar mitzvah. The rabbi cut my portion in half. I had like the Ishtar of bar mitzvah. bar mitzvah chanting.
But Dan, I think you're being somewhat generous uh, to the way people treated race and ethnicity at the time, by suggesting that this was somehow especially bad.
Yeah, I think like saying that, well,
Saying
yeah,
that,
it's not usually this explicit unless it's in like a D.W. Griffith movie. Like you're gonna have people in blackface and whatever in the background of most of these kinds of movies. And yeah, I guess like this was the same time on Coney Island. Like you could let's see, the two biggest selling attractions. Somebody in the comments correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I remember this from when I went to the Coney Island Museum. The two most popular attractions there were a recreation of the Titanic that would quote unquote sink 5 times a day, and basically like you know that kind of carnival attraction where you throw the baseballs at the target
uh-huh.
and you win a prize. And so that with a black guy is the target. That was literally one of the best selling attractions on Code. Just like people throwing baseballs at a black guy.
White people, presumably.
White people, presumably. And it was, yeah, it was not, it was a very, very different time.
I was telling you earlier about, I still remember that very special episode of Facts of Life. So we're talking about the 80s, in which Natalie learns that Tootie's cousin is married to a white guy.
Oh yeah,
and that was like a big deal.
And with and weirdly enough, I'm trying to think, the two earliest movies I can think about that involve like quote unquote interracial marriage. The first one is actually by D.W. Griffith. Did you ever see Broken Blossoms? I think 1922.
No.
It's not, I mean, it's like it's shot very beautifully, which a lot of those are. And it's this really weird, like they never consummate the relationship. It's like all subtext, but it's really, really obvious subtext. And it's Lillian Gish is dating this Chinese guy, basically.
Uh-huh.
And it's kind of interesting that, yeah, like the first two examples of, because the other one I'm thinking of is the Frank Capra Bitter Tea of General Yen with Barbara Stanwyck. And they're both about like white Asian interracial relationships. I can't think of the first movie with like a white person and a black person dating, or even the implication that they were dating. That I know there's got to be one before To Kill a Mockingbird, but that's the earliest one that's coming to mind.
I mean, if you were dating,
no, there's the implicated, right? Because like her father, what's his name, Tom Ewell, is like or at least she's attracted to him, and then she says like, oh, he tried to attack me to get out of like being in trouble with her father. Isn't that what happens in that book? I mean, I read that when I was in like middle school, so if I got those details wrong,
yeah, then she accuses him of raping her.
Right, it's just like I can't. Yeah, I'm coming up with a blank. There probably is some earlier example, but
guess who's coming to dinner?
No, that's later. That's 67.
No, I know. I'm sorry, Dan. I was discounting.
Oh, To Kill a Mockingbird.
I was discounting To Kill a Mockingbird because there's no relationship there.
Yeah, there's no I guess just even the implication that like a white person would be attracted to a black person. Or wait, no, not To Kill in My Shadows by John Cassavetes. We covered it.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Earlier.
Yeah, there we go.
Actually goes into it and does a pretty good job of navigating the complexities of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so now there's none of that in this movie. And yeah, this is just like it's like a sex anxiety movie, or like male, right? Because like the mythology of like male adulthood in U.S. culture revolves around a few like prerequisites, and like the kind of myths and stories that we tell ourselves repeatedly tend to always come back to the person is married generally in a heterosexual marriage, the person is either rich or at least substantially materially comfortable, and the person has somehow like symbolically proven their genuine qualities or good nature to society.
So
And
the first two are marriage as a capitalist trap.
basically, yeah. And I mean, I think like there's definitely a lot of that in this movie.
And
Um,
the third one is really nice people get caught in a capitalist trap.
right. Yeah, and so Buster Keaton, you have this, but you have this incredible degree of like, because I don't think Buster Keaton actually believed in this stuff, because so much of his film output, like even though he does eventually get the girl at the end or whatever, or it's implied he gets the girl at the end. Although I think at the end of the general, right, like he gets the girl, but he's still got to go off and fight in the Civil War, so he probably like dies 10 minutes after the film ends.
We don't know that though. That's not what he's going for, I don't think.
I mean, it's there, and he doesn't seem that happy to get what he wants when he finally gets what he wants. Like even in this movie,
Uh,
um, and I so there's a few biographical details about Keaton that I think help fill in why he was so preoccupied with this. The women coming after him for the money, he was married to the sister of the head of the studio that he worked for. So there's and then he eventually got screwed over by the family in the divorce. Um
Wait,
and,
isn't this him going after her money then?
uh yeah, I mean, although he could feel, because like she wasn't a movie star or anything, so he probably was more valuable to the oh god, I wish I could remember these people's names, but he was more valuable to them than they were to him, except for the fact that they had the money to put up to make the movies.
Uh-huh.
So it's it's not that weird to think that it was not a marriage of love. um it's also not weird to think that he had, because he was performing on stage in vaudeville from the time he was 2 years old, and a lot of his early quote unquote performances were basically like his parents tossing him around like a Nerf ball.
Uh-huh.
Like by pretty much any modern standard. Like on the one hand, the only way you get that good at doing stunts, because he does all of his own stunts, and like when he's jumping on the back of a car that's moving, he's actually doing that. You know, there's a million of these things. Uh, by any modern standards, Buster Keaton's childhood was basically like he was in an abusive family that was literally doing it in public to make money. Um, so you got to figure he's got to have some weird attachment issues, right? Uh, and then also just this sort of like conflicted relationship with the fact that the only validation he seems to get in public is by like risking his safety for other people's entertainment. Like that's got to do stuff to your head, right?
Okay.
Um, and so in this movie, I feel like is the most cynical and probably the most like scathing of all of the Buster Keaton movies, because it is just purely like it's just anxiety dumped on screen, but in a very funny fashion with a lot of like interesting visual metaphors. But
So what does it say that this is your favorite?
well, I mean, I usually, in a person's body of work, obviously it depends on the artist, but I tend to drift towards the thing that seems like it's the most personal and direct communication.
Mm-mm.
Which this is like, this is not the most technically impressive Buster Keaton movie. That's probably Sherlock Jr. Uh, but you have like, yeah, you have kind of it also just sort of like male sex anxiety films kind of fascinate me, because you know, I've lived as a man for 32 years, and you know, kind of part and parcel with that is like, you know, hangups about relationships, dating and whatnot. uh the other thing being that it's something that shows up a lot in film, but I don't think is discussed that much. Like I can name a few other movies, like the Jerry Lewis, The Ladies' Man is very similar to this, except that like at the end, Jerry Lewis doesn't get the girl because Jerry Lewis, like Pee Wee Herman, is not. He's supposed to be like a child essentially. So even when he gets the girl at the end of the movie, they go to great pains to reassure you that he is this sexless creature.
Uh-huh.
You know, like nobody else would be next to like Shirley MacLaine in that Bat Lady suit at the end of Artisan, because like Shirley MacLaine in that Bat Lady suit, like right, but uh, you know, you see her next to Jerry Lewis, and it's like, oh man, they might play some checkers when they get home, right? Like, uh, yeah, oh,
Knocked Up. Don't forget Knocked Up.
Knocked Up. Yep, Knocked Up is sort of the pyre, like Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Pretty much any of those Apatow movies are about it, it's about like a man child being forced to grow up by circumstances and a woman, the woman being mostly symbolic of the circumstances, except for the one case where that's flipped, which is Trainwreck, where you have this woman who is clearly not grown up at all being forced to sort of grow up by Bill Hader showing up. Yeah, that's kind of fascinating because that's like a lot of it's a thing that's not talked about a ton, that is a massive part of how, at least in my life, I've had to approach society, I guess. Right, like people will presume certain things about you if you're like a single dude.
It's rough being a straight guy in this day and age.
Oh yeah, no, it's well, I'm not saying that it's like rougher than anything else. I'm just saying that like the second I had a girlfriend, and I show you know, you show up someplace and there's some woman that says like, okay, this guy's not like a lunatic, or if he is a lunatic, I'll vouch for him. The difference in how people look at you is like astonishing. Compared to, you know, the prior 8-9 years of my life where I'm just sort of showing up. Granted, some of that's on me, you know, because I kind of come across like wild man Fisher or whatever until you get to know me. But yeah, I guess like it. The other thing is the stunts and the camera movement was really compared to like movies in the 30s. And we've had this discussion on the show before, right? Like the sound recording equipment was incredibly heavy, so people don't really move around very much in those 30s movies. Or if they are moving around, you're not going to have sync sound in that portion of it.
I don't know how much sound equipment they needed to carry around for this one, though.
Well, for this one, no, it's a tiny camera that's incredibly portable, and you can tell there's all those tracking shots where it's literally they're just shooting out the side of a car.
Yeah. And there's no sound.
And there's no sound, right? And that was that was another kind of less obvious reason when it went to talkies. You didn't have the freedom of camera movement, and that hurt Buster Keaton's career like enormously.
Oh, okay.
Because he couldn't do that kind of stuff. And then insurance standards started, which granted, you know, I'm not saying that was a bad thing. It was a bad thing for Buster Keaton. It was a good thing for everybody else. But you couldn't get a film insured doing the kind of crap that he does in this movie or basically any of his other 20 silent films.
That's what killed vaudeville. The insurance premiums.
Probably, yeah. I mean, vaudeville was very physical, especially in the case of Buster Keaton. The other weird thing here is that Buster Keaton's Irish, right? So that kind of adds another wrinkle to the race politics because, like, Irish people were not fully. Although I guess, like, the thing that actually makes you white in America is inheriting $7 million, right? If we cut into the chase here.
Yeah, and he was already doing well enough to he was doing well enough and was white enough to go to the country club.
Right, he's a Walter Lippmann. He's he's like something in my refrigerator. He's green on the outside and white on the inside. No, but like, oh, but yeah, and so there's a lot of dynamic camera movement. The gags are very quick. I think this is probably in terms of just like the pace of the gags and how many of them work versus how many don't work. This is probably the best one of the Keaton films. Certainly, it's the one I laugh at the most, for sure. Probably because the jokes are a lot more blunt, I think, than in some of the other ones, and there's this singular focus around all of them.
So this has two of his most famous gags. It's got him dodging the boulders, rolling down the hill, and also hundreds of women chasing after him in the street. Both gags last a very long time, like minutes and minutes and minutes, frenetic, and they're both just funny throughout.
Yeah, and that was like with silent films like this, the chase sequence, especially in Keaton. Like, have you seen a lot of the shorts from like the pre-1920 stuff? So like, I'm trying to think, like The Neighbors, The Goat. There's like 20 or 30 of them. I saw all of them at one point because they're all on the Kino DVDs, but a lot of those, it's just a 20-minute chase sequence. Like, you'll have 30 seconds of setup, like, I accidentally kicked this guy in the butt, now there's people chasing after me. That's the rest of the movie. And I think like and then also like the very last film that Keaton was ever in was actually a play on that. The Samuel Beckett movie called Film. You ever see that?
No.
So yeah, so you got like Buster Keaton pretty much right before he died. Samuel Beckett is directing Buster Keaton, and he's just this like scared man being chased around by a camera, and then it acknowledges the camera at the end, and you kind of have these thoughts about like, because like I don't think the power of silent comedy film comes from it's not a power of specificity, it's a power of tapping into universals through extremely broad metaphors, right? Like there's not usually a lot of setup, and it's just sort of the shape of this scene that we've probably seen in some variation several times, right? Like there's a gag where he runs through a football field in this one, and the players all get like stampeded. That's a variation on a gag in Harold Lloyd's The Freshman. Probably, I don't know how you would do that in vaudeville, but maybe they did that in vaudeville. And yeah, you're looking for fine distinctions, and also it's just motive. If you're looking for character motivations to do anything besides make sense of the kind of bare bones plot in a silent comedy, you're not going to turn up much. And for me, that's the appeal, is that a lot of it is almost like subconscious free association, because there is so little expectation of coherence beyond a few beats that need to be hit at the beginning, middle, and end of the film.
Hey Dan, Film wasn't Buster Keaton's last movie.
Oh, was it The Railroader Rides Again?
No, it was A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. He has a small part in it, but including some physical comedy.
All right.
And voice, but no, he's not the star of the movie. Film, he's the star.
Yeah, Film is definitely the last one where he's the star. But yeah, there's like, I mean, I remember I went in looking for Buster Keaton because there's like some really weird shit from the tail end of Buster Keaton's career. Like, I'm trying to think. I mean, this isn't the weirdest thing. He did this great guest spot on the Donna Reed show that I saw at the Museum of TV and Radio years and years ago. That was really sweet. Yeah. It's like he's older. I think he's playing the milkman, and then he just sort of gets to know Donna Reed, and then it turns out he's this sweet old guy. There's an episode of The Twilight Zone that's basically just an excuse to have a 20-minute Buster Keaton movie that he's in.
Buster Keaton was on the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, there's a Buster Keaton episode of the Twilight Zone.
Look it up.
And probably the strangest one of them is there was a sitcom that was pitched and a pilot was made, but it never went to series. Well, actually, Buster Keaton had his own show in early television. I think there's only 2 surviving episodes because it was shot live in the mid 50s, but it was literally just him doing vaudeville on a stage again, basically. And the one with a bit more production value that was made later was it was called Medicine Man, and it's on volume 2 of the Ernie Kovacs collection DVDs, the Shout Factory ones.
That doesn't sound appropriate for today. I'm just guessing where this is headed.
Oh yeah. I mean, I probably told you about this before, but like, so you got Ernie Kovacs is like this P.T. Barnum style snake oil salesman in the Wild West, which that sounds like a great premise. So far, so good. And then you have his sidekick, which is Buster Keaton, very old Buster Keaton, who probably needed money. I mean, not saying that Buster Keaton was like especially racially sensitive or anything, and he was just doing it for the money or whatever, but complete red face, like down to the, he's got the headdress, he's got everything. And it's probably for the best that never got picked up for series. I wish that it had been a different concept, because like the idea of Ernie Kovacs and Buster Keaton together, that's amazing. That's what the fucking Jimmy Durante movie should have been, right? Because like the big issue with the Jimmy Durante movies is just Jimmy Durante is not funny. I don't know why people love Jimmy Durante back in the 30s, but and like I still get Martin and Lewis, but I do not get the appeal with, I mean, I guess he's like an amiable guy who can play the piano and sing every once in a while, right? Like that's a lot of what people wanted to see at the movies then, just based on how many people like that show up in movies from that period. But yeah, just squandered potential, unfortunately.
He was always very nice to Mrs. Calabash. Every night he would say good night, wherever she was. But enough about.
I'm not saying Jimmy Durante was a bad guy. I'm just saying that like he's like a fucking lead balloon in any of those movies with him and Buster Keaton. I mean, there's one. It's a terrible, terrible movie. Did you ever see The Great Rupert?
Probably not.
Okay, we should do that for a Christmas episode, because that movie's fucking bonkers. But yeah, it's like an early Ray Harryhausen like claymation stop motion showcase, and there's just like this squirrel that lives in the ceiling of this family's house named Rupert, and like the best parts of the movie are the stop motion squirrel. That the stop motion squirrel should have gotten an Oscar that year. I think this is from 48. And so it's the Depression, at least in the movie. Maybe it was 38. The family's all poor, and they're like, oh, we're struggling, we're poor. And then Jimmy Durante's like, sometimes I just wish that like a bunch of money would fall out of the ceiling. And then the squirrel digs a hole through the ceiling. Money literally rains from the ceiling. That's the end of the movie. It's amazing. Like,
you know what was missing from the ending?
What?
And good night, Mrs. Calabash. Well,
okay. All right. I'm trying to imagine the squirrel gag. I'm enjoying it. All right. So I don't have to watch the movie.
I mean, it's like the last 5 minutes of it. It's public domain. The copy I got was one of those like dollar DVDs at the dollar store. So it can't be that hard. There's probably a much better looking copy on YouTube at this point. But yeah, if you want a lesser known but completely bonkers Christmas movie, because the squirrel drops all the money on Christmas, because of course the fucking squirrel drops all the money on Christmas. Yeah, give that one a shot. Okay. Yeah, so Seven Chances. Yeah, I guess just sort of the single-mindedness of it. It's got like a lot of momentum for a silent, because like silent movies, sometimes they'll be kind of not paced super well. or like you have kind of these hiccups because there's not, there's no like screenwriting classes. There's no real set way to make a movie beyond stuff that you can take from theater. And this one is just sort of like, it gets to the point. There's practically no exposition. I think there's like 5 minutes of exposition, and most of it is still just gags. It moved incredible. It felt like a half hour when I watched it this time.
Oh yeah. I mean, this wasn't even an hour long. It was, I think, 56 minutes.
Yeah, but like, so
felt like
same
a
with
lot less.
like that W.C. Fields movie we watched. That was, I mean, there were some great parts in that, but it moved a lot slower than this.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I think all the exposition for this was right at the beginning, where there were a whole bunch of title cards, and then the title cards mostly went away.
Yeah, there's the title cards, and then there's the little meeting in the office with the lawyer explaining the premise, and then everything after that is basically just variations on essentially the two. There's almost one gag really throughout the entire movie played on either side, which is either Buster Keaton screws up propositioning somebody or somebody screws up propositioning Buster Keaton. And he's able to riff on that for an entire hour.
Yeah.
Which is nuts. I mean, like, and that was entertainment was a lot more expensive back then, so being concise wasn't held in this same super high regard that it is now. Which, for better or worse, like some of those early Chaplin shorts. I think the one I'm thinking of is called like 3 a.m. or something like that, but it's literally just Chaplin. There's a table. Chaplin came home late and he's drunk and he can't put himself to bed, and he gets 20 minutes out of that, which is like nuts.
Yeah. There we go. This should have been a double feature with that.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, there's some stuff that probably could have made. Maybe we can do like a silent shorts thing. We can do like because Fatty Arbuckle, there's all that like juicy Hollywood Babylon stuff with him.
Right.
I mean, that also, like, if Keaton was super paranoid about a mob coming after him, because like he got his start, like Fatty Arbuckle's relationship to Buster Keaton is like Dr. Dre's relationship to Eminem or something like that. Like, the very first shorts that Keaton appeared in were Fatty Arbuckle shorts. Fatty Arbuckle was vastly more famous than Keaton in 1916. And then Fatty Arbuckle, like, you know what happened to Fatty Arbuckle, right?
I most certainly do.
Yeah. So,
and we don't need to go into details.
We don't need to go into details.
If anybody wants details, they can look it up themselves.
Yep. Kenneth Anger, Hollywood Babylon. Very entertaining book, with some trigger warnings. But yeah, so Fatty Arbuckle, yeah, like the idea that Keaton would be paranoid or like completely distrustful of crowds or of the fact that he's getting all this attention for this specific thing, the idea that it could kind of all fall apart, that probably had to be in the back of his head, right? Like, you see something go down like that when you're like 20 years old.
Oh, huh.
Yeah, because Arbuckle, it turned out they were after the money later on, but by that point, silent movies had ended and he never recovered.
Right. It was too late.
Yeah, it was too late to save his career, because he probably would have been like the fourth big silent comedian in the US at that point, if that whole thing hadn't happened.
So it opened up the door for Buster Keaton to take over.
Yeah, and like the studio was actually kind of, because the first few Buster Keaton movies, the very first one that he shows up in, it's a little bit like the first Martin and Lewis movie. It's called The Sap Head, and he's just like this bit character in the back. Otherwise, it's this like unbearably maudlin, silly romance movie.
Uh-huh.
And then obviously everybody liked Buster Keaton more than they liked the sappy maudlin. I mean, you got to figure this was a point in U.S. history where one of the most popular like genres of recorded songs is like dead mother tributes. Like, it was a weird pop culture. And but yeah, even with that, they're like, okay, Buster Keaton, we want to see Buster Keaton, kind of like with My Friend Irma. Like Martin and Lewis are in the background, but it's very obvious that My Friend Irma is not going to become a film franchise, but Martin and Lewis are going somewhere. And yeah, then the next one is literally just three what they called two reelers stitched together called Three Ages, because they didn't have confidence that a feature length comedy was going to do well. So they just tried to like sneak in shorts. I'm trying to think like the earliest one that resembles a feature film is probably Sherlock Jr. I'm probably goofing on, there's probably one earlier than that, but I'm trying to think what else there is to say. Well, I think with this movie too, with the whole like a thing I didn't really notice the last few times I watched this, or that there's this like kind of false abundance, right? Because there's all these different people that are just kind of presumed to be sexless for one reason or another, and then you have Buster Keaton who's being chased by a million women in wedding dresses, and he doesn't want any of them. Right, like the lawyer makes that joke, like if you bring two brides, I'll marry the other one. Yeah.
Oh, they're all sexless. They're all in it for the money.
Right, they're all in it for the money. Buster is in it for the validation that comes with the money. And there's not really there's no appeal to some kind of greater human nature in this movie the way there would be in like a Chaplin movie. Like everybody, by the end of the movie, everybody's still just sort of like shitty and patrician. Just like he got the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's
yeah, I'm not sure what else there is to say about a movie that consists mostly of, I just realized, 3 big chase scenes, not two major chase scenes, and the smaller one is, oh wait, 4. There's the 2 main ones, and then there's the guy trying to hold on, I'll erase that part. 3 major chase scenes in this movie. The 2 that we've discussed, they're the 2 famous ones. But then there's also the lawyer is chasing. That's a more protracted one, or choppy one, in which the lawyer is chasing after him, trying to show him the letter saying that he's going to get $7 million if he gets married.
Oh yeah,
it's a whole bunch of little mini chases, or him trying to catch up to Buster Keaton.
Yeah, they're like they're leading up to like the big chase at the end. It's like if you're looking at like a silent movie or a silent comedy, if it's an opera, like the chase sequence, the sequence with the stunts, that's like the aria. That's what everything's building up to. There's conventions to it, but it's not like if you have a chase sequence, it's not like, oh, you stole the idea of the chase sequence. That's like baked into the whole premise, basically.
Right.
And yeah, and this is the best, like the thing with the women in the wedding dresses, that's probably the best chase sequence in silent comedy, period. It's just all of it is so ridiculous. Every gag is incredibly tight. It just works. There's that hilarious part where he jumps into like the stream and he comes out with a turtle on his bow tie.
Yeah, that was cute.
Yeah. And
but yeah,
no
need to try and squeeze any more out of this. It was a 56-minute movie with really long chase scenes in it. Oh, it's like an action movie. It's like your average action movie.
Well, I was about to say, like, I love this movie. I saw Matrix Reloaded when it was in theaters.
Double feature?
Huh?
As a double feature?
Actually, funny enough, the day I saw Matrix Reloaded was actually the same day I went on the second time I ever went on a date. I went to see X-Men 2 with a woman who I've not seen in a very long time. I guess that's probably the best. You might know her as anyway, but yeah, and then I went home because like her mother picked her up, so we just sort of went to the movie, ate a little bit of food for like 5 minutes, and then her mother picked her up and swept her back to wherever. And I go home, it's still the middle of the day, and my dad's like, I'm kind of jealous, I want to go see a movie. And I was like, okay. And so like an hour later, we just went right back to the movie theater and I saw Matrix Reloaded. So it was a double feature pretty much. Why do I remember that much detail about that? And anyway, Matrix Reloaded, it's all car chases, right? That's all that movie. There's like the one scene where you're in the architect's place and he's got like a bunch of monitors, like it's a sports bar, and that's like 5 minutes, but the rest of it's car chases.
Right.
And I can't stand that movie. That movie is terrible. That's such a bad movie. Speaking of which, Matrix 4, they're doing it.
Yeah.
Can't one of them's doing it, and the other one is the other one thought better of it, I guess.
Yeah, the other one was wise. Wait, can you hold on a moment? I'm gonna pause this for a moment, okay?
All right.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, so
Matrix. Oh yeah, Matrix 4 coming out.
Yeah, Matrix 4 is coming out. There's no new Buster Keaton movies coming out that I'm aware of.
I'd have to check to see, but
the only one that was like
right.
lost, they found the last 5 minutes of it in like a Chinese archive. I want to say like 15 years ago, something like that.
So there's still another 15 somewhere out there.
Oh no, the first 15 minutes weren't lost.
Oh, just the ending?
There's this gag that he claimed got the biggest laughs of any gag that he ever did. It's a short, I forget what the name of it is, but basically he like falls down this hole, and then the last shot is him with like a family in China, implying that he fell through the entirety of the earth.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and I think like with Buster Keaton too, you get the sense of, because you could draw a line between like Buster Keaton and stuff like Jackass pretty easily, except that like the cultural values associated are, very different, right? Like it's seen as kind of for better or worse, it ended up breaking Buster Keaton's neck in the shot and that was pretty early in his career too. That was Sherlock Jr. when the water tower collapses on him.
Yeah.
So like when he was making this movie, he was probably having like full day migraine headaches, because I don't think they figured out that he had a spinal injury until like 1930. And yeah, like it's seen as kind of heroic or adventurous or whatever, and by the time you get to physical comedy now, it's kind of all about, it's like very self-aware of the pointlessness of stuff like the chase sequence, right? Like the last purely physical comedy movies that I remember coming to a theater were basically the Jackass movies, right? And that's like physical comedy based around the idea that like these people are injuring themselves. That is what is inherently funny about this. Yeah, like kind of developed into a theater of cruelty. At the same time, you don't have vaudeville to kind of create physical comics anymore. You don't have people doing this kind of stuff from a really young age. Like Jerry Lewis, I think, was the last one where he came up in vaudeville. Or I guess like Jerry Lewis and Jacques Tati are kind of the last two actual like straight up physical comedians. I can't think anybody after that where like they're the star of the movie. There's like bits in those early Woody Allen movies where he's clearly trying to do like a silent movie sort of thing, like in Bananas and Sleeper. But silent comedy is an art form, or physical comedy in the mold of what was being done in silent comedy is pretty much dead by like 1970, I would say.
Hey, don't forget Benny Hill.
Benny Hill was pretty great. Yeah, I like Benny Hill. Benny Hill's like peak commercial success was like mid 60s through the mid 70s, right? Something like that.
Audience peaking at more than 21 million in 1971 for the Benny Hill Show.
Yeah, and I think it's also like it's a reflection on how differently, because like people would have lived most of their lives in 1926 like outdoors doing stuff. Like a physical comedy now would not really like, it makes sense that the physical comedy you would have now would be born out of kind of existential boredom and resulting desire to harm oneself, a la Jackass, versus just sort of engaging with the physical environment. Like there's much more of a sense at that point, correctly so, that the outside world and the physical environment can be pretty precarious. Like, I mean, so okay, so there's like a scene there's a gag where the angry mob of women in wedding gowns, which I also want to point out that they all have different and equally janky, like, makeshift wedding gowns, which is a great detail. Like, there's a lot of attention to detail in this movie that I did not pick up the last time I watched it, because I probably watched it on like a laptop screen.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
You did not. I did.
No, I picked up a fancy old projector, and it is we're gonna do a video at some point when I get my video stuff better set up, where we'll go through and give you some tips on setting up a home theater, because I feel like there's a lot of wisdom I have to pass on there.
Step one, buy home theater equipment. Step two, hire somebody to install it for you.
Right. I mean, but there's little tweaks you can do, like that thing we did with because full disclosure, I set up Ron Stereo for him a few. Although you did it yourself the second time, you like reattached everything. Sounds like it's not rocket science. It's pretty easy to do, right?
Yeah, and you say that like it's the first time I've ever done that.
Well, I don't know. You needed me to do it the last time. I don't know.
No,
I don't presume that anybody knows how to do this stuff. I was trying to explain this stuff to the podcast for like 5 years, and she was like, I don't get it.
No, Dad, I didn't need you to hook it up for me. I just needed you to carry it up the stairs because of my back. Okay. Oh, you thought I needed you to hook it up?
I don't know. I don't presume any level of knowledge about this stuff, because people don't really use it anymore.
No. Oh, okay. No, I know how to do that, and I know what to do with the speaker wire and making sure that I plug it in the same way on all ends. So, I mean, it's not fancy stuff. I guess what you told me that I didn't know, or you pointed out to me stuff like putting the speaker at a certain height so that it's actually facing me.
Right. And it's weird, because I've been in setup. I've seen people's setups where it's like the speaker's practically like behind their couch. They can't figure out, like, oh man, it sounds like somebody's like making a ransom phone call, and it's like, oh, it's because the fucking speaker's behind your chair. You try talking behind your chair, right? But yeah, no, like basic stuff, like, yeah, put the speaker roughly at ear level.
Yeah.
Getting the most out of it, getting like in the case of this projector, I got a very old projector. This is like 15 years old, but the specs are really good. And they make these things for like classrooms and offices, so they're built like tanks. And yeah, this thing looks like perfectly good in the middle of the daytime, and I paid $40 with the shipping. So there's like tips and tricks for getting more bang for your buck, basically. I guess. But anyway, so yeah.
I'm still laughing because it never occurred to me that somebody wouldn't be able to hook up speakers. But I guess nobody hooks up speakers, so it makes sense that most people wouldn't know how.
I've had people people call me and they're like, yo, can you do this for me? Because I think, especially with some of the older ones where they have 5.1 sound, it does get a little confusing on the back, because like, if you're not used to hooking that stuff up, like, you're not going to know front means stereo.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And that kind of stuff. But like beyond that, it's just like wire to wire. It's not that hard to do.
Right. There's exactly 8 points of contact.
Right.
Speaker and two per speaker in the back of the receiver.
Yeah. And
I remember, although Dan, I remember when I didn't realize that you needed a receiver.
Yeah, the receiver. Well, I mean, you don't need a receiver if you have powered speakers, which is like a sound bar is a powered speaker, essentially, right?
Well, you need to hook the CD player to something.
Yeah, you need to hook the CD player. I mean, and if you have powered speakers, you can just hook the CD player to like a switcher and not a receiver. But it's a lot nicer having a receiver because you get all the options, right?
Right.
And you can get like, because powered speakers, you can get very nice powered speakers, but by and large, very nice speakers, they're presuming you have an amplifier, and they're not gonna like, I mean, the other thing is like powered speakers, if you got like two powered speakers and then you got to have something to run both of them, you're looking at 3 plugs in the wall versus 1 plug in the wall. Anyway, so back to Buster Keaton. So they're throwing there's this gag. We got all the women in wedding dresses. They go over to this construction site and take all the bricks this guy just laid out of the construction site. We see the crowd of them, and then we see the guy with no bricks in front of him. And then they start chucking bricks at Buster Keaton. And to put this in historical context, because this kind of blew my mind the first few times I talked to people that lived through the 20s and 30s about this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of jokes in 20s stuff about people throwing bricks at people. That's, Crazy Cat. The entire basis of Crazy Cat is this mouse throwing bricks at this cat's head.
Right.
And so I'm talking to my grandfather, and he said, like, he would get into turf wars in Brooklyn with the Irish kids. And 1 or 2 times they just started chasing after him and chucking bricks at him. And then he had to jump into the ocean and swim away to get away from the bricks.
Oh, wow.
In Louis Armstrong's autobiography, Satchmo, which is a great read if you never looked at it. He's very, he's a great entertainer, but he's also a very good storyteller. He's got some wisdom. He's got a great eye for what details are actually interesting in a story. I really enjoyed that book. Anyway, early in the book, he's talking about kids are, we get into fights with the kids, and he basically figured out how to like sing and play the trumpet because it was the easiest way to get these kids to stop throwing bricks at him. People were throwing a lot of bricks at each other back then.
Yeah, wow. That's back
right.
when bricks were smaller and sort of not made from the sturdy material as we have nowadays, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of construction going on in that period, especially in New York City and presumably in New Orleans, where Louis Armstrong was. But yeah, like when my grandfather told me that, and then later on with the Louis Armstrong book, that I tied this stuff together, and it's like somebody probably threw bricks at George Harriman's head when he was a kid. And that kind of like when you realize, oh, okay, sometimes a brick is literally a brick. Crazy Cat reads a lot differently. Yeah. And it's the same here. Yeah, like the rough and tumble stuff that seems kind of over the top may or may not have actually been over the top by the standards of the mid 1920s. Which is always a good thing to remember when watching this kind of stuff. Do you have any thoughts or observations or?
Oh, well, I do have something.
Okay.
Oh, wait.
We got to get you like a soundboard, right? Like they got on Stern. So you can just like make toilet flushing noises when I'm going on too long. I think that's what this show needs.
Benny Hill theme, Yakety Sax by Music Boots Randolph.
Yep, Boots Randolph, Yakety Sax.
Okay. So
that's the original, that the one you hear on Benny Hill. That's Boots Randolph led a novelty jazz band in the 50s and 60s.
Anyways, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't have much else to say. All right, but you know what else we should watch?
The third Pee-wee movie.
I still want to make up for ruining Pee-wee for you. Say, no, this will revive it somewhat. I just watched the trailer to see what was in it. Well, because at first I went to see if it was still in that still available.
I mean, that's not going to ruin Pee-wee for me. Like, I've heard all 4 sides of Self-Portrait, and I still like Bob Dylan. Like, certain things can be forgiven.
No, but it's back to it has the gags like his interior funhouse that are closer to the same spirit as the first one.
And
And yeah.
I guess with Buster Keaton, another thing that like kind of struck me this time around, because I did watch like a ton of Buster Keaton when I was younger, and I saw a few of these in a theater when I was in college with piano accompaniment. So he's like famous for not having a lot of facial expressions, right?
He has one.
He
It's a
has
stone
one. I
face.
mean, he has like some subtle facial expression. He would have been really good in a Robert Bresson movie, right? And but he just looks depressed. I never quite put my finger. He just looks like distracted because he's depressed. Like that's his natural resting face,
Uh-huh.
right? Like he always seems kind of anxious and preoccupied.
Uh-huh.
Maybe that's just me.
No, that's about right. Yeah. His stone face was really a depressed face.
Yeah, he's a sad clown.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of
But without the frightening makeup.
right, like WC
makeup.
Fields is like a cranky WC Fields is the externalized sad clown, and Buster Keaton is like probably the most internalized sad clown.
Oh, poor lonely Buster.
Yeah, I mean the guy had kind of a tragic Buster Keaton wrote an autobiography that's also very, very entertaining. That's well worth a read. I think it's just called My Life or something. Like it's got like a very generic title, but some of the stuff he talks about growing up in vaudeville, and it's like weird because to him this is just the most normal thing in the world, that like his parents are tossing him around like a football when he's 3 years old.
Uh-huh.
And it's very surreal reading.
Because he had fun with it, right? He liked being tossed around.
Yeah, well, because he's getting all this positive attention, right? Like you're 4 years old and like people are clapping for you and laughing at you and stuff. Like you'll do just about any, I mean, kids eat fucking worms and shit, right? For attention.
Well, and I remember how much fun it was when, being thrown up in the air when I was a little kid. That was always fun.
Well, you get thrown up. I mean, when you got thrown up in the air, I'm presuming, like when I say chucking him like a football, I'm not like, that's not hyperbole. That they're literally just chucking him across the stage like a football.
Yeah, and you go
like if he couldn't land like a cat, he would have been probably dead by the time he was 8.
But yeah, no, I my final thought was the Benny Hill theme.
Yeah, and Benny Hill, I would be curious to read because I haven't read up much on how Benny Hill got into that stuff. And you also, like, as time goes on, there's less and less elaborate psyche. Like the last movie or the most recent movie I can think of that had like a really elaborate physical comedy gag that was like as ambitious as a Buster Keaton stunt or something like that is probably like the last Jerry Lewis movie, Cracking Up. Which actually that's pretty good. There's like a lot of that. And that's another movie about like the first 10 minutes of it are like just like Jerry Lewis tries to kill himself unsuccessfully. It's a really dark movie.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, there's like buildings falling down and like craziness to the gags. Yeah.
All right. Well, do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I guess so. That's probably all I have to say on that subject. Oh, I guess one last thing on Keaton is that the technical stuff he's doing in terms of editing, in terms of shooting, is pretty advanced for the period he's doing it in. And Keaton probably had a better technical understanding of film than any of the other silent comedians, because he was like he was sort of like me that way. Like when they gave him the movie camera to make his first movie, the first thing he did was he went home and he took the entire thing apart and put it back together again overnight. So he had like an exceptionally advanced technical understanding of how that stuff worked compared to say like Chaplin or Lloyd or yeah. I guess that kind of lends some, and that's probably why I think Keaton was the most favored silent comic of like the French like Nouvelle Vague, the Cahiers du Cinema crowd, because there's a lot of things that kind of point towards these are auteur films there's a singular voice guiding the film.
Uh-huh.
That's all I got. Oh, wait. And the one thing I mentioned this during the movie. This is probably far more entertaining and interesting than anything I've said so far. But like, the human hamster ball thing, I told you that when we were recording, right?
Yeah.
Should I go into that?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm driving through Seattle years and years ago. I met this couple. We had dinner, and they tell me like they have like 12 or 15 uninflated human hamster balls called Zorbs in a warehouse somewhere, just in storage. And they're like, if you can think of a way to use them in a movie, we'd be more than happy to get them out of storage. And I thought about it pretty hard because I thought I was moving to Seattle for like a hot second years and years ago. And 3 years later, after I lost all their contact information, I finally had this idea where it's basically just 7 chances, except it's about 2 Elvis impersonators getting married. And just all the people in bride outfits are dressed as Elvis. And so you have 2 people that think they're Elvis being chased by like an army of Elvis impersonators. And then you recreate the Boulder gag from 7 Chances with just like Elvis impersonators and human hamster balls. And that's as far as I got. I started trying to write a screenplay, and it was just a bunch of like bad Elvis jokes. But that image, there's something there. The idea of like Elvis chasing, like, maybe it's a metaphor for the Civil War, right? Like brother against brother, Elvis against Elvis, is something, right? I never quite fleshed it out, but I had this very vivid image of these Elvis impersonators and human hamster balls rolling down a hill like boulders. And yeah. So
Elvis,
anyway,
Elvis tribute artists.
yeah,
That's how they like to be called.
right. I mean, for some of these people, it really is like that's kind of their like board. That's functionally their religion or something, right? Like the further you go down south, like when you get down to Mississippi, like it feels like half the economy revolves around Elvis tchotchkes. So like Elvis is sort of, I guess, the rain god is something out there. But anyway, I'm still Dan.
And I'm still Ron.
This is a nominee questionable movies. Today we talked about 7 Chances, starring and directed by Buster Keaton. If there's a movie or some kind of pop cultural artifact that you think we should talk about, leave it in the comments. Hit like, hit subscribe. It helps us feel like we're not losers. And we'll see you at the movie, or we'll see you. We don't see you, you see us, really. I mean, it's all been a lie.
Or they mostly just hear us.
Yeah, you mostly just hear us. So you'll hear us in your head. That's not a good sign off.
Here's the sign off. Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you're at.
And with that, we'll see you later.
Take care, everyone.
And good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever